right. So today, as you may or may not know, so I'm going to be going through kind of my journey of finding my voice through audio production. I'm currently a voice actor and content creator and course creator, both at the Work from Home Voice Actor and Podcast Production School. But beyond that, I also run a voiceover services business. So Melanie Scroggins Voiceovers is my business. That's where I offer services to clients from across the world. I've been able to work with some really awesome people and love what I do. Like I said, I'm running stuff at the Work from Home Voice Actor and Podcast Production School as well. But what I really wanted to get into today is how all of this began. So, podcasting actually started as a hobby for me in my RV. So, my husband got a job with the Bureau of Land Management, and we moved to Oregon. We had bought this RV, we rented this RV, and we were there. And we hadn't put much thought into what I would be doing. And so one day I was just kind of like, hey, I'm doing these freelance writing gigs and all that with the RV community that we were in. I was like, what, do you have any other ideas for things that I could be doing or like making money or whatever? And he was like, well, I don't know about that, but I have this mic. I was like, oh, wow. Okay. And so I used this USB mic and I had some time and I ended up falling into this love of podcasting. And my first podcast started as an experiment. I had no idea what I was doing. I had been an avid podcast listener for, I don't know, 2 or 3 years. So I was kind of new still to the space at all, but had no idea how they were made, had no idea that individuals could do it themselves. Very much had this assumption that it was large companies and organizations, but it's not. And a lot of you know that by now, but I definitely did not know that in the summer of 2017. And so this was a really fun opportunity for me to just create and kind of stretch those muscles. Backstory, I'm a psychology major. I had no intention of ever doing anything in the audio space. I thought I was going to do research. And then I got married and decided to not do that and didn't know what I was going to do. And then podcasting just felt like the first thing that I could do and was able to connect with other people doing in a way that I hadn't been able to before, especially not through creating something. So I wanted to share an example of kind of what that looked like for me in the beginning, if you're interested. And if you're not, I'm going to share it anyway. But this particular interview was with my husband. He hiked the Appalachian Trail back in 2013. And one of the reasons I wanted to try my hand at something like this is because he had recorded a bunch of sound from the trail itself. And so I was able to incorporate that into our interview, which is a lot of what I did with that particular podcast was very experimental and interview driven. So I'll just let you hear just a little bit of this and let me know if you can't hear it.
Snow, lots of rain, heat. Yeah, the heat was the worst part. A lot of times I remember there was an entire month which just straight up sucked. There was a heat wave coming through the mid-Atlantic area, just going through New Jersey. New Jersey is when I think it was the worst, mainly because there were surprisingly, there were swamps in New Jersey with swarms of mosquitoes. So we were low and it was hot.
So that just gives you an idea of something I kind of experimented with and had a really great time with. And when I wasn't able to utilize sound that I had, I used websites like Free Sound. And I mean, I was looking all over the place for different things that I could use that were royalty free. So that's kind of how my entry into podcasting began. And then later, like I mentioned, I was a part of this giant RV community. We even attended like these summits every year while we were RVing. And all of a sudden I had these business owners reaching out to me saying, hey, I heard your podcast, or, hey, I started listening to your podcast, or, heard that you were doing this. Would you be interested in providing these services for our business? Again, I had just gotten into creating my own podcast. I had no idea what that looked like for a business. I didn't even know that businesses utilize podcasts at that point. That's how much of a newbie I was. And basically I was like, well, I mean, I'm just making this for myself. And they said, yeah, that's exactly why we want you to help us with ours. And I said, oh, okay, I guess that makes sense. And so I became a full-time podcast producer for about 3.5 years. And these are just examples of some of the podcasts that I was able to work on over the years. And I've had a great time. I've met some amazing people. That's been a really fun journey for me. Then I stumbled upon a newfound career as a voice actor. And it may seem like these are very similar industries, and they are. I mean, you need a mic, usually use a mic for both, and you're editing audio and stuff like that, but it is a totally different space. And one day, just as entry into this, my husband came home from work and he was like, hey, how's it going? And I was talking about how much time it was taking me to work on my show, which again, I was doing for free in my quote unquote spare time. And he said, well, what do you like about podcasting? What would you continue to do if you could just choose one aspect? And I said, I really like hosting. Hosting is a lot of fun. I like having these conversations. I like going in. I would go and record my commentary afterwards and then input it into the show. It was a lot of work, and I would never recommend that to anyone unless someone's paying you really good money. But anyway, he said, well, you might enjoy voice acting. And I was like, voice acting? I was like, people can't be voice actors. I was like, that's like for Hollywood. Like nobody in an RV is a voice actor is basically what I was thinking. And so I started kind of just, again, going to the internet and saying, okay, what is this voice acting thing? How do people get into it? And then I started auditioning for free gigs on Behind the Voice Actors. And here we are 4 years later, and I'm still working on one of those projects. And beyond that, I've actually been able to work with companies like Google, Hyatt, Duolingo, Lancome Makeup, Subaru, and a lot more. And that's because I started taking myself seriously as this voice actor that I didn't even know I could be. And that was in 2019. And so I've just had a lot of fun since then. And I wanted to share with you an example of my most recent national commercial. So this was with Crowdstrike last year, and it is still running until July. And so you might have seen this on TV, but just kind of wanted to share this with you real quick.
We stop breaches so you can get started. We watch the cloud so you can lay the groundwork. We lock it down so you can level up.
So that's just an example of that. And I'll skip that one.
The workplace is.
So basically, what I have ended up kind of living in, especially when it comes to my creative process and business, is to teach everything that you know. And I actually have a sticker that says that, which is where I even got this from. And I have no idea where the sticker came from, but it's on my my board that I write all of my goals and all of the different things that I'm working on, because I've had so many people influence me and help me through my, whether it was podcasting process or voice acting process. And so I very much live in teach what you know so that other people can either learn to create, in a similar way and create their own processes, or give them inspiration so they can come up with something completely new. So that's where podcast production school came from. And then the work from home voice actor platform. All right. So with all of this, like I said, I've been in these two different spaces. I've seen the ins and outs of podcasting. I've seen the back end. I've seen the front end. I now teach on this stuff. And then voice acting, I've been doing that for 2 years full time. And I work on those things. I produce my own audio. I produce my own demos. So I'm very intimately involved with the audio production space. But there are some things that I would absolutely do differently. And I just want to go over that with you real quick. So creatively, like I mentioned earlier, I wouldn't have spent so much time on the creation process and not enough time connecting with other people who were creating or were podcasters or whatever. So there is beauty in creation, and that's great. But once you share it, be sure to consume other people's creations. So that's how I even knew I liked podcasting at all, was because I had been a consumer of podcasting. And so I wish that while I was creating, I took the time to connect with other people who were still doing the same thing. And then business wise, because kind of each of these hobbies turned into their own business ventures, I would absolutely go back in time and tell myself, do not let others take advantage of you early on just because you're a newbie. You deserve to be paid professional rates. This is something I teach my students in both platforms I work on. And that's because it's so easy to feel like, well, I'm new, I don't deserve that. I don't deserve whatever. But to be totally honest, like nobody who is in their particular role or anything right now knew everything about that role before they got in, and they were still getting paid because they have to live a life and pay for things. Right. And so it's really important to create rates for your business that work well for your life and your business. And then personally, you got to do things your own way. I would have told myself that the status quo is highly overrated, and I would have spent way more time understanding kind of like how Steve was just talking about in his talk of just what is my category of one, right? Instead of, going back to Texas like we did. And then I started getting these different office jobs and I was miserable again. And I would have a job and I would quit and have a job and I would quit. And then finally I decided to take myself seriously. That particular way of working and living was not for me. And I wasn't honest about it. And so I would go back in time and be really honest with myself and say, is this what you want to do? Because if it's not, we've got to figure out something else. So with what I would do differently, here's what I would do again. Creatively, I would create something as an experiment. And I've done this 10 times over because I've proved to myself with the first podcast that this can happen and like nobody dies, right? And so there is something to be said about creating for the sake of it, of your curiosity, and being able to share stories, whether it's your own or whether it's other people's. I've learned so much from the conversations I've had with people about them and myself. So I highly encourage you to do this, regardless if you're in the podcasting space or a different space. Business-wise, remain open to any and all possibilities, especially when it comes to relationships. So this is something that has proven, again, time and time again, and given back to me tenfold through every single endeavor that I have tried to go about doing on my own. So I'm a DIYer and I spend a lot of time researching. I spend a lot of time figuring things out. I think that's one reason why it makes this creative and business process that I kind of go through really effective for my lifestyle and personality. But this has led me to pretty much everything that I've done. So I started my podcast. People reached out to me about working on their podcasts. Then I'm a full-time producer. I ended up connecting with my now business partner and another lady that we work with to do podcast production school because I knew all the ins and outs of the back end and how to get it up and running. And then they had the marketing and social expertise. And so that was just like, this combining of these wonderful and different worlds. And then from there, like I've had a bunch of different relationships that have popped up. Being here to me is a prime example of what it looks like to really put yourself out there and make connections. I wouldn't be here speaking to you now if that weren't the case. So I cannot stress this enough. Remain open and look for those relationships that are mutually beneficial. Again, creative, personally, and business-wise. And then I would go back again and take a chance on myself like I did and know that I have value to offer. And that's another thing I really want to stress to you. No matter what space you're in, you have skills. You have skills, whether it's in your life or whether it's in your business, that you can offer other people, whether for money or not. Can be just time, like what I did originally. It was all just about time and creating and sharing. But we all have something that we can offer. And it's about us figuring out, again, that category of one, like Steve says. So now I want to go through just a couple strategies for both of these individuals. So the first part of the journey being creative, the second part being service-based business owner. So for the creative, you have to decide who gets to influence your creative process. So for me, it's my husband and sometimes kind of, right? So like he's in my intimate space. He's been the one who's followed me through this whole journey. He knows me well, and I trust his opinion. My parents, not so much. I love them to death. And if they're watching this, I'm sorry, but like they don't quite understand what I'm doing. And so if they ever have any input in what I'm doing, I kind of say, thank you, or in my mind, just say, thank you. That's extra commentary that doesn't get to influence my process. So that's super important as you go through creating your own show, working on other people's shows, or deciding like which step you want to take next, no matter what it is. And then you've got to create something that's interesting to you. If you create something for everybody else, I always say that just means that you're playing at what you're trying to do or what you're trying to create, but it is. If it's not interesting to you, you're not going to continue to do it. And it's not that it's a waste of time, but it may be kind of hindering either your, whether it's your schedule or whether it's your just creative energy. So you need to create something that you want to create. And then another thing that I would say is to niche down as much as you possibly can. So this has proven true for me now, and it took me a long time to get here. But I had a conversation with Harry Duran, who's a big person in the podcasting space last year. And this was one thing he said to me immediately when I was starting a show and I was consulting with him about it, that I did not follow until recently. And it's totally changed the game for me and my show. So I don't say that just for, getting, making money or anything like that. What I'm saying is this is how you find your people, and this is how you really understand your message. So niching down is super important. And then if you're a service-based business owner, you're interested in working remotely on service-based things, like whether it's audio production or something else, remember that you're a business owner first. So this was something that I did not do in the beginning, that I firmly live in every day, because I get to make my own decisions, which means I have the most responsibility in my business, right? It's not anybody else's fault when things don't get done or I don't meet my quotas or whatever. It's mine, which is both a good and a bad thing, but I've got to remember that each and every day. And then the only way to really understand your progress or lack of is to track the ins and outs of your business. So obviously we want to know how much we're making and how much we're spending, but we also need to know, like, okay, who am I working with? Can I take on any more clients, etc. So you've got to be able to focus on like the most valuable information and allow it to inform the decisions you make going forward. Then you have to understand your industry. So if you're new, like, again, I keep going back to my first experience, but it's because that was my life, right? That's my story. But I didn't quite understand the industry. I didn't know until somebody reached out to me that you can hire independent podcast producers who work for you remotely. Like, I didn't even, that was a totally new world to me. And so I dove in and tried to understand it. And now I'm totally saturated in it because I teach on this stuff. So I'm utilizing both my experience and what the ever-changing aspect of the industry, especially when it comes to podcasting, because it is ever-changing, which is super exciting. This medium is incredible. So I guess my biggest takeaway is you've heard my journey through audio production, finding my voice, and, you know, going through this creative process and running businesses. And I think, like, you know, sometimes I'm hesitant to even share like my client list for voiceover, because I feel like it's kind of braggy, but partly I want you to understand, like, whatever work you put into what you're doing, that will come back to you. I'm a firm believer in that. But that doesn't mean that your journey will look the same as mine if that's an endeavor you want to take, or it won't look the same as some of your friends and colleagues, right? So your journey is not going to be the same as mine or anybody else's, and it really shouldn't be. So I know we don't have time for a Q&A, but please connect with me. I think that there are links elsewhere, but feel free to jot these down. You can connect with me on social and ask me questions or give me comments. And then you can also sign up for the newsletter that I send out specifically for aspiring beginner voice actors at workfromhomevoiceactor.com. But I'm so excited that everybody's here today, and I just thank you so much for taking the time.
Excellent. Excuse me. Thank you very much. That was great. We have a little bit of time. I have a couple questions, if you don't mind.
Oh, absolutely.
Now, you said your parents are having a hard time with understanding exactly what you do.
Yeah.
But your husband, I'm assuming in the beginning, when you said, and I know it was gradual, but what was his mindset as you were trying to transition into this? Was it very supportive? Was it, hey, yeah, I don't understand it, but do what you do, or what? And for those that have spouses or significant others that maybe don't understand the space as well, what kind of advice do you give them as you try to, get into it?
That's a really great question. And I do have one of my business partners, her husband's like that, where it's just, there's a disconnect with what we do, especially remote entrepreneurs, like no matter what space you're in. I have an advantage because my husband wanted to study audio visual stuff. And so he went to school in Austin for a little bit, studying that. And so he kind of had this expertise as far as like, I mean, it was amateur expertise, but he's very good at those kind of details and understanding what goes on. And so it was not a hard jump for him. I mean, he was the one who introduced me to podcasting. He was actually the first podcast episode I ever listened to was when we were dating and we were in his living room and he was like, listen to this podcast. And I was like, what are you talking about? Nice. And so that was not a hard jump. And so when I always give him credit because he really has been the one who's kind of instigated my best ideas. Like he's the reason I had, the podcasting experience. He's the reason I started thinking about voice acting, and this is where I am. So I am very lucky. I've been very fortunate to have a husband that kind of understood the space. And then once I was in it, was supportive and saying, yeah, let's do this. He actually quit his job last year to help me in the business. And so I feel like our situation is a bit unique, but as far as a suggestion goes for other people who may not have supportive spouses or partners, like I said earlier, so it kind of depends on if this is something you're just doing creatively, like as a hobby, or if it's something that you're doing business-wise. If it's creative, find your people. They are out there, right? I mean, this medium is huge and it's only expanding. It's mind-blowing. So just for context, fall of 2019, Apple Podcast was clocking in 800,000-ish podcasts. By early 2020, it was over 1 million. And then as of today, it's over 2 million. So this is just like, I mean, it's ridiculous how large this space is. So your people are out there, I promise you. And then if it's for a business, like that's just, I think, some boundaries that you're going to have to set and say, this is what I want to do. This is why, and this is how it's going to help us and our family, or, our lifestyle. But that can be really tough. So if that is your situation, and you want to talk, like, feel free to reach out to me via email or otherwise, because I will help you be that person, or I will be that person for you if that's what you need.
Yeah, one of the things that stood out was when you were talking about the rates to go and charge, full rates.
Yeah.
But being in this space and dealing with a lot of indie podcasters and
Mm.
creatives just in general aren't necessarily more business minded, right? And so
Mhm.
they kind of struggle with that part of it.
Yeah.
Maybe confidence wise, they struggle about, well, I'm just starting. Why should I charge this much? So what about when a client says, what's your rate? You give them a good full rate, and they're like, but what's your experience? How do you approach that part of it?
Mm. That's a really great question. And this is something our students at Podcast Production School come up with a lot, partly because they're excited to go through the material. They learn all these different things. They've packaged their services, they've priced their stuff out, they've calculated how much they want to make. And then they get to the point where they're like, oh my gosh, I'm in these conversations. What do I do? What do I say? The first thing I would say, and this is something that I've done in both my businesses, is do not overinflate what you can deliver, and don't offer more work than you have time for or willing to put in, because you won't get paid for that, right? So it's kind of a two-way street of don't say you can do something if you can't, because the client just wants you to be honest, because either way, you're either going to be able to deliver or not based on their budget. And then it's just an honest conversation. This is why we encourage people to have what are called discovery calls, which is where you set up 15 to 20 minutes of getting to know each other a little bit. And they can kind of do a Q&A with you like we're doing now of, okay, well, what's your experience? What's this stuff? And for people who haven't had clients, I would highly recommend, depending on the skills you want to offer. So for instance, if you didn't know how to edit audio and you learned how to do that, create your own podcast or mini series to be able to share that with your clients, to say, hey, this is what I've done. This is what I'm working on. This is the quality you can expect from me and my work. And then from there, you can get into the nitty gritty of pricing and how much work that would look like for them. But it needs to be an honest conversation. While I've done this before, not offer too many services to make up for what you think their budget is. And, if you feel like you're getting paid too much, you'd be like, oh, well, I can just do this. They're already paying me X. Definitely don't do that. So it's very personal, but at the same time, you need to be honest with yourself and with whoever you're having those conversations with. But that's a really great question.
Okay, as we start to wrap up, a couple more real quick.
Yeah.
What is the single biggest reason for your success here in this industry right now?
Oh my goodness. Oh, that's really interesting. That's a good question. Honestly, like looking at myself, 4 or 5 years ago and now, is I didn't quite understand the space. So that was kind of the first point for me, was if I understand this, maybe I can understand a little better about where I can offer value and where I can fit in and what I can do. And then secondly, is just being open. So I am an introvert. I know it doesn't seem like it, but I am. And I don't take a lot of energy from being around people all the time. It exhausts me, but I really enjoy it in like these kind of spaces. And so I've tried to be open to that and say, there is something inside of you that really enjoys that. So seek out those opportunities, meet those people, connect, be open when people have questions, and do not be afraid to share what you know. That is a huge thing. So people are under this assumption that if I share what I know and I share all this stuff, that people are going to, outwork me or make more money or take my clients. There are plenty of people out there. We've got 7 billion plus people on the planet. You will be fine and they will be fine. And honestly, the community, whether it's podcasting, voice acting, whatever, will benefit. And so I'm personally trying to do that. I think that has attributed to a lot of my success recently, just because not even like the stuff I'm doing, but mindset, just thinking about this space as a way to share. My goodness, people in audio production, like no matter what side you're on, whether you're helping create or whether you're promoting or whatever, attending, we all have something to offer that's special, that's different about us, right? And so when you're able to find that space, like you're able to to really create some input and provide some inspiration. So I think remaining open and just allowing yourself to be in those spaces is huge. And I would say that's absolutely been the case for me.
Okay, last question. We with the festivals that we have, we do 3 a year, and we're going to continue to do 3 a year for the next 20 years. Who knows, right?
Awesome.
We're having so much fun. Now that they're going to be in person, it's going to be even better. But
Yes.
when we have you back on our physical stage here, maybe next year, the year after that, what are we going to be talking about? What's this industry going to look like? And specifically, what is career-wise, work-wise going to look like for you in 2 years?
Yeah. Oh my gosh. So that's been on my mind a little bit more recently because we're expecting our first baby in October. I will be at the event in September though, so I am going to show up. I'll just be really pregnant. But for me, absolutely, it's still preaching this: be open to possibilities, know that you have value to offer, but also reminding people that working from home is just the way it is now, right? That's a huge part of what both corporations and organizations at all levels are seeing. And my job, at least I've taken it on myself to educate people on how best to do that, especially in the audio production space. So I'm now teaching, I teach podcasters, but I'm also teaching voice actors or aspiring voice actors how to do that because it is absolutely attainable. This is my studio and I did not start here. I started it in closets, right? But I had my first national commercial closet. Like, that's insane. And then one example I like to bring up is Kelly Marie Tran, who voiced Raya in Raya and the Last Dragon, the new Pixar movie from Disney, Pixar and Disney. She also had to record at home. So like, just thinking about those experiences just reminds us that things don't have to happen in the same way it always has. The status quo is highly overrated. And if we have all of these updates in technology and communication and equipment, why wouldn't we use them to make them work for us, right? And so I think that's only going to continue to be a trend. And I am super excited to be a part of it and help other people learn how to do that for themselves.